Hello and welcome to the Doof Book Club, our monthly live stream discussion of a book chosen by you, our listeners. My name is Matt Freeman, hopeful, optimistic ship captain who believes in the best in people.
And I'm Scott Daly, grizzled, jaded police detective that thinks you're a fucking idiot.
We make quite a pair, don't we?
Have you met my ghost girlfriend?
What?
Hello, everybody, and welcome. I hope you're having a wonderful Friday evening. It is the last Friday of the month, which of course means it's time for another book club. If you are in the chat right now, say hello, talk to us. We want to hear from you, and just tell us how you're doing. And if you are joining us for the very first time, welcome. We are Doof Media. We make podcasts about the stories we love, and we also do this book club. Matt, want to explain what the book club is?
Yes, I do. Each month, Scott and I select 5 books from a pool submitted to us by our wonderful Doof community. We put up a poll for all of our supporters on Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia, and we let them vote on which they'd like us to talk about. The book with the most votes wins, and then we all read it together.
All right. So we do have some people in the chat. We have Elliot, David, Matthias, Tilde. How's it going, guys? Good to see you. Glad to have you guys here. Very excited to talk about this book. Speaking of which, this is the next part where at the last Friday of every single month, we meet up and chat about the book that was chosen. We will pull slides about important or interesting moments and dive deep into this book for a couple of hours. And like I said, for those of you in the chat right now, feel free to talk, ask questions, let us know what you think. This is a book club. This is not Scott and Matt talk about a book. This is all of us talk about a book. We're just leading the discussion. So, feel free to chime in, and we might miss some of your comments, and for that we apologize, but we want this to be an interactive discussion. So, interact.
That's right.
All right, Matt, what is this month's book?
This month, our patrons voted for Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey, book 1 of the Expanse octology.
Yeah, I don't know. Is that like a word? I don't know.
I
mean, I know it's not done, right? So it's not really going to be in whatever.
Yeah, series.
Sure.
Series.
Sure, fine.
But the summary of this book from Goodreads is as follows. Humanity has colonized the solar system, Mars, the moon, the asteroid belt, and beyond, but the stars are still out of reach. Jim Holden is XO of an ice miner making runs from the rings of Saturn to the mining stations of the belt. When he and his crew stumble upon a derelict ship, the Scapulae, they find themselves in possession of a secret they never wanted, a secret that someone is willing to kill for, and kill on a scale unfathomable to Jim and his crew. War is brewing in a system unless he can find out who left the ship and why. Detective Miller is looking for a girl. One girl in a system of billions, but her parents have money, and money talks. When the trail leads him to the Scapulae and rebel sympathizer Holden, he realizes that this girl may be the key to everything. Holden and Miller must thread the needle between the Earth government, the outer planet revolutionaries, and secretive corporations, and the odds are against them. But out on the belt, the rules are different, and one small ship can change the fate of the universe.
Yeah.
It's a very epic summary. I like it.
It is. It's like very movie trailer-esque.
It is.
It's like one girl, she's the key to everything.
Right. I felt compelled to read it in that voice. Usually I just kind of read the summaries. This one was like one man.
Yeah. All right. So before we get into diving into the book in detail, we usually just spend a few minutes talking about our overall impressions of the book. While Matt and I are talking about this, this is where we ask you guys what you thought of the book. Had you read it before? Did you read it again for the book club, or are you just coming in from the last time you read it? And what do you think of the book? And Matt, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so I did read this book a few months ago, not too long ago. Enjoyed it. Didn't read the next books in the series for whatever reason. And then of course we did the Expanse TV show episode, and then the book club came up, and I found that I actually enjoyed the book more the second time and thought the writing was better. I don't know why exactly. Maybe I was just paying more attention to the writing. But the story is obviously great. It's just this gripping adventure. My brother got me to read it in the first place by telling me that it was like someone's space D&D adventure. which for some reason seemed very compelling to me, and I still feel like that's a pretty good description.
Yeah.
So yeah, I liked it a lot. How'd you feel?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. If for those of you out there, if you did not listen to our episode covering the television show, or at least the first season of the television show, I think we were all pretty positive on that show. I think what I generally said is I really liked the Miller side of the story way more than I liked the Holden side of the story, and I actually think that remains true in the book. Just because I think Tilde is asking us in chat, are we generally noir fans? And my answer to that question is yes, absolutely. I love noir. I think it's a fascinating genre, and that's why I really like gripped onto the Miller stuff right away.
Yeah.
But overall, I really liked the book, and I was a little nervous going into this, to be honest with you, because when we were having conversations about the show, you and Daniel made it seem like this book was like much more like heady, like super detailed science fiction than it actually ended up being. I think it is definitely more detailed than the television show was. And I'm not blaming you guys. That's just the impression I got during that conversation was, oh, this is going to be a thing where we're going to have like 5 pages talking about the Epstein drive or something like that and exactly how it works. And while accuracy, scientific accuracy is important to the story, absolutely, 100%, it is not the key, like it is not the entry point of the book. And it was really fast paced. It moved very well. I really liked all the characters. The dialogue runs along at a good clip. It's always fun. It's always interesting. It does make you think. There's a lot of little like kind of transhumanism themes going on here that I think are probably going to be picked up more in the sequels. And I think it's going to be a good conversation because I think there's a lot to talk about it.
Cool. Yeah. As for the technical stuff, I think that when you care about the realism, you really appreciate it when it's there, even if it's very much in the background. Just and it permeates everything is the thing. Like, yeah, it doesn't spend 5 pages talking about the drive, but like every detail of like, okay, water is scarce. What are all of the realistic implications of the scarcity of water?
Yeah,
I mean, this whole thing starts because water is so scarce, and there's a water hauler is nuked, and that's like a huge disaster.
Yeah.
And just like the idea of you're born in low gravity, you can never go to a planet. I mean, it's really minor things, but they're respected and they're held consistent, and that's what I like about it.
Yeah, sure. So in the chat we've got Tilde is saying that they enjoyed the way different stories mashed up at the end. Yeah, it is cool, and we'll kind of talk about that, how through really the first half of the story it's these 2 different stories and they're slowly moving together. Then they combine, they kind of bounce off each other and separate a little bit again and then kind of come together. It's really fascinating structurally how that works. I really enjoy it. David says they read it just before the TV series and enjoyed it. Matthias says, first time reading it, I liked it. You like the horror bits. Yeah, I like the horror stuff a lot too. Just this kind of unknowable monster creature, and the way the book describes what it does to people, like the hands walking around dragging rib cages, is very viscerally horrifying. I like it a lot.
Like we said on the other discussion, it's like Dead Space is much more accurate to this book than the actual movie was, or the show, I mean.
Yeah.
The horror stuff worked well. Tilde says Elliot agrees that it was a better read the second time. I really, maybe we'll figure out why that is as we go through.
I'm curious about that. I mean, like, one of the things I can absolutely say is reading the book has made me appreciate the show more and kind of makes me want to go back and watch that first season again, because I just feel like I'll have just a better grip on the details behind what's front and center, and that'll make me appreciate and like really tune into the characters a little bit more. So maybe that's what a second read does as well.
Maybe so. Yeah, maybe so. David says they like how it treats the travel between basically the space travel. I mean that's the cool thing. I'm just going to repeat it here in case people didn't listen to the other episode. Like the idea that if you just had a efficient high thrust engine, you could actually make the solar system feel this small. You don't have to break any laws of physics. You just have to kind of, the only thing you really have to hand wave is like, yeah, somehow we make a fusion engine that is just very, very efficient. And then bam, you can jet around the solar system like this.
Yeah. All right. Kirk says that they like what the book does with Holden, who had a lot of the hallmarks of the traditional hero character, but makes it very clear that he isn't always helping matters. Yeah, we're going to definitely get into that. I think one of the things that's fascinating about how exactly in the ways in which Miller and Holden bounce off each other is how they are kind of their specific archetypes are in conflict with each other, and because they are both protagonists, the book wants them both to win, but it's almost impossible. And just seeing how it handles that as it goes through the story, I like that a lot.
Yeah, cool.
All right, are we ready to dive right in?
I think so.
Let's start at the beginning. The scopuli had been taken 8 days ago, and Julie Mao was finally ready to be shot. It had taken all 8 days trapped in a storage locker for her to get to that point. For the first 2, she'd remained motionless, sure that the armored men who'd put her there had been serious. For the first hours, the ship she'd been taken aboard wasn't under thrust, so she floated in the locker, using gentle touches to keep herself from bumping into the walls or the atmosphere chute she shared with the space with. When the ship began to move, thrust giving her weight, she stood silently until her legs cramped, then sat down slowly into a fetal position. She'd peed her jumpsuit, not caring about the warm, itchy wetness or the smell, worrying that only that she might slip and fall in the wet spot left on the floor. She couldn't make noise. They'd shoot her. On the 3rd day, thirst had forced her into action. The noise of the ship was all around her, the faint samsodic rumble of the reactor and drive, the constant hiss and thud of hydraulics and steel bolts as the pressure doors between decks opened and closed, the clump of heavy boots walking on metal decking. She waited until all the noise she could hear sounded distant, then pulled the environment suit off its hooks and onto the locked floor. Listening for any approaching sound, she slowly disassembled the suit and took out the water supply. It was old and stale. The suit obviously hadn't been used or serviced in ages, but she hadn't had a sip in days, and the warm, loamy water in the suit's reservoir bag was the best thing she had ever tasted. She had to work hard not to gulp it down and make herself vomit. So this is the first words of our book, and I wanted to pull this because I wanted to talk about the concept of the prologue and kind of revisit our conversation that we had in the show where I specifically said I don't think this prologue worked. But one of the other things I wanted to do was kind of look and examine how the book is like keying you into the rules of the world very subtly in this introduction here. Like the parts that I really gripped onto was how it kind of teaches you that in this world, thrust means gravity, no thrust means zero gravity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of slowly teaching you that without you really being aware of it right here in the opening paragraphs.
Yeah. There's also a kind of fatalism that I feel pervades the whole book. You've got themes of resource scarcity. I mean, right here, first couple of paragraphs, she's talking about water being a resource that is scarce and that she's desperate for. And in a sense, the whole plot revolves around water or just around resources. And of course, this idea of like hiding in terror is a bit of an idea that we have throughout the whole thing, as basically we're following characters who are running in their own steel box across the solar system.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, let's talk about the structurally this prologue, right? Because I think to repeat what I had said in the show is that one of the problems I had with the structure of the show was that by starting off with this prologue where you say, this is Julie, she's on the scopuli, she's dead, ? We're not actually dead, but we know where she is, we know who she is right at the beginning, and then we go to the first half of this book is really a mystery around Miller trying to find Julie. And I said in the show it kind of killed the momentum of the detective story they were trying to tell. I don't feel that way about the book. And one of the things I was really scrambling with was why don't I feel that way, right? Because structurally it's basically identical in that this is almost exactly how the show starts, that we have this opening bit, like this opening cold open where Julie is struggling in this place, finally breaks out, finds the alien, and then screams, and then we cut to black, basically.
Yeah.
So I mean, the thing that I like when I was thinking about this that I really kind of tried to figure out was I just think the detective story is structured differently in the book, in that it's less supposed to be a mystery. And I really think I really think that like because you can see inside Miller's head, that like the mystery is important to the story, absolutely, but it's not really the focal point. It's like you're much more concerned about his character in general. And I think the way they did this really cleverly in the book is he's constantly seeing his ex-wife, right? And the seeing the ghost of his ex-wife slowly throughout the course of the story morphs to this ghost of Julie. And I think having that perspective, being able to see through his head and being able to focus specifically on his character in a way that I don't think the television show did as well, made me not care so much that like, oh, part of the mystery is solved.
Yeah, right. You're more focused on the slow disintegration of this man, and then he like takes the life preserver of this case, like this
Right.
the one last case that he feels like he's going to redeem himself as a human being, because he realizes that he feels that he hasn't really been a good person, but he's going to do this one last good thing, and it comes to mean just everything to him. And yeah, it becomes less important like where is she? It's more like you're just following him on the journey.
It's more like, where is he?
Yeah.
Mentally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why.
Yeah. I mean, I agree that it just seems like it's less of a big like shock when you find out like, oh, Julie Mao was on the scapula. It's just like, oh, okay. Wonder what that means, you know?
Yeah. Because I mean, definitely through the beginning, it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, there's this girl we don't know on the ship, and then very soon in the book, our detective gets a case that's saying, oh, I bet that's the same Julie Mao.
Right.
And that's really all you have to go off of.
Right.
But, yeah. I also think the book threads the Julie Mao. Like, I felt like in the show, and I promise we're not going to spend the entire book club talking about show versus book, but I felt like in the show, Julie Mao was like a case that he worked because like it started from the beginning of his path to redemption. Whereas in the book, I thought it was threaded much better in that like he kind of ignored it at first, but it just kept tying back into current events that were happening. Like he found himself sucked into it inadvertently. And I think that is just a better framing device for how he gets so sucked into this Julie Mao thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Next slide. So these are the opening lines of the first chapter proper, in which we get our first real bits of the truly expository world building, and then we meet Jim Holden, protagonist number 1. 150 years before, when the parochial disagreements between Earth and Mars had been on the verge of war, the belt had been a far horizon of tremendous mineral wealth beyond viable economic reach, and the outer planets had been beyond even the most unrealistic corporate dream. Then Solomon Epstein had built his little modified fusion drive, popped it on the back of his 3-man yacht, and turned it on. With a good scope, you could still see his ship going at a marginal percentage of the speed of light, heading out into the big empty. The best, longest funeral in the history of mankind. Fortunately, he'd left the plans on his home computer. The Epstein drive hadn't given humanity the stars, but it had given the planets. 3/4 of a kilometer long, 1/4 of a kilometer wide, roughly shaped like a fire hydrant, and mostly empty at space inside, the Camaraderie was a retooled colony transport. Once it had been packed with people, supplies, schematics, machines, environmental bubbles, and hope. Just under 20 million people lived on the moons of Saturn now. The Camaraderie had hauled nearly 1 million of their ancestors there, 45 million on the moons of Jupiter. One moon of Uranus sported 5,000, the farthest outpost of human civilization, at least until the Mormons finished their generation ship and headed for the stars and freedom from procreation restrictions. And then there was the belt. If you asked OPA recruiters when they were drunk and feeling expansive, they might say there were 100 million in the belt. Ask an interplanet census taker, it was nearer to 50 million. Anyway you looked, the population was huge and needed a lot of water. So now the Camaraderie and her dozens of sister ships in the Pure and Clean Water Company, had made the loop from Saturn's generous rings to the belt and back, hauling glaciers, and would until the ships aged into salvaged wrecks. Jim Holden saw some poetry in that.
I love this. I really love this opening. I think it's fantastic. Just in the fact that it very nicely exposits a lot of our most important information to us, but more importantly than like laying the rules of the world, I think the tone of the world is really wonderfully established here. Like this idea of they're on the ship that was once a colony transport. Once it had been packed with people, hope. It had once been packed with hope. which by connotation means that there's no hope anymore. None. And now they're simply ferrying. I mean, they're kind of still ferrying life back and forth, which is the poetry I think Jim is talking about there at the end. But it's just in a different manner. And I like this idea that there was once a moment in time where the horizon opened up, the frontier expanded suddenly, and there was this bright future where people could go out to the outer planets, establish a new life, a new civilization. And now we've moved on from that. We're 150 years moved on from that, and things are bad. Things are not like better. This is not an ideal society. This is a society struggling to survive. Mars and Earth on the verge of war 150 years ago, still on the verge of war now. Except now there's no hope of something in the future, unless like some evil scientists take an alien bug that they found and
they're just trying to create hope. Everyone,
sure, exactly. That's what it is. Yeah,
they did nothing wrong. I always pay attention when a book breaks all the rules and it works really well, because I would never in a million years have written a giant multi-paragraph exposition dump at like basically the beginning of my book.
Yeah.
And expected that to work. I would have peppered this information throughout later bits of the story. I would have delivered some of it in conversations or kind of offhand. But this is so tight, so efficient, so clear. It's really quite short, but it tells you Epstein drive, new technology, open the stars, or open the inner planets to them rather. They're on a ship that's an ice hauler for the belt. The belt is a population center in this future, and now you know the context of this whole world and where this character sits within that context.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like it's written well too, right? Like it's not like I love the fact that he doesn't just say like the Epstein drive was a blah blah blah. It's like Solomon Epstein, a man, it's human centric, right? This man built it and then shot off into space and now, now we have it. And it's like, it is actually a little story. It's a little like 3-sentence story about how the Epstein drive came about.
Well, and I love it too, because like the story doesn't say, and then he died and shot himself out into the far reaches of space, and then gave this gift to humanity. No, it's he'd left the plans on his home computer, and maybe I'm reading into that, but my interpretation of he left the plans on his home computer was not he was planning to give this to people. It's just people found it and then said, "Oh, this is really good. We should make this."
Yeah, and
did it. Like it makes like it's this like fundamental important piece of that your entire civilization relies on, and it didn't seem like he gifted it to the world. It seems like he discovered it for himself, said I'm getting the fuck out of here, and people just so happened to find it because he left the plans on his computer. I love that.
Yeah, I do too. It's like dark, right?
Yeah.
Just to harp on what I said a little bit more, like the thing about where the Epstein drive came from is a story, right? It's a little tiny short story. The story of the Camaraderie is also a little tiny short story. It's not just the ship had been an ice hauler. It's a brief description of the ship, then the story of the fact that it was used as a colony ship to colonize, to help colonize the outer planets, and then now it's being used as an ice hauler, and like it's just your brain just likes it more, right? When it's told as a little narrative.
Yeah, because there's a little bit of an emotional connection there. Yeah, cool. I totally agree. And what it does, I think, very cleverly is we kind of are learning a little bit about Jim too. Like we haven't, like the story really in this part right here has not like really started to explore his character. But that one line, he sees some poetry in that. Like this is like I tell you, the tone here is without hope, is like struggling to survival, is the golden age of civilization has passed us by, and yet amongst all this, Jim Holden sees poetry, something beautiful in the fact that the ship that they've used once carried life and now carries a key ingredient to life.
Yeah, right. Because it would say something completely different if if Jim Holden had a different reaction
Yeah.
to this fact.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Cool.
Tildy's talking about how anachronistic religion in a space travel context is always compelling to them.
Yeah.
I'm just like this little drop of like the Mormons and their generation ship.
Yeah, and it's not the only bit of religion we get in the story either. I pulled the slide because I liked it so much, because there's a conversation between Miller and missionary priest later in the story that I think is really, really great.
Yeah. Eliot says that there are a bunch of short stories and novellas outside of the main novels, and the Epstein story is one of them. So that's cool to know.
That's cool. Yeah. What I mean, you before we move on, talking about like how you were talking about like this is kind of breaking the rules. It is interesting because like there are things in this where the story is explaining things that like anyone would know within the world, right? Like the Epstein drive, like anyone that exists within this world knows what that is. And so it's explaining those things. But then there are other things that like intentionally omits. Like it talks about OPA recruiters. It does not say what the OPA is. It does not define what OPA is. We don't get that till later. And so it's like it's telling some things. It's almost as if as we go down this exposition, we're like zooming into Holden's perspective a little bit. Where by the first line, the first time his name is said, we are fully like we have moved out from this third person omniscient, like more to this third person close that that we're in through most of the book.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was intentional or not. That's just a feeling I get when we move from all this wide exposition to we kind of shrink down a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, it definitely does feel that way. I mean, it's just fascinating to me that they make that work again. Like it seems like it shouldn't work, but yeah, there's a bunch of reasons why it does. It's pretty brilliant, actually.
All right.
Cool.
That's enough of that. Let's move on. All right, so it's time to meet our second protagonist number 2. This is Detective Miller, Ceres Station cop. This is Miller getting his inciting incident of the novel. It's a little lost daughter case, Captain Shadid said. Ariadne and Jules Pierre Mao. The names rang a bell. Miller pressed his fingertips onto the screen of his ham terminal. Mao Quickowski Mercantile, he asked. The one. Miller whistled low. Malquick might not have been one of the top 10 corporations in the belt, but it was certainly in the upper 50. Originally, it had been a legal firm involved in the epic failure of the Venusian cloud cities. They'd used the money from that decades-long lawsuit to diversify and expand, mostly into interplanetary transport. Now the corporate station was independent, floating between the belt and the inner planets with the regal majesty of an ocean liner on ancient seas. The simple fact that Miller knew that much about them meant they had enough money to buy and sell men like him on the open exchange. He'd just been bought. They're Luna-based, Captain Shadid said. All the rights and privileges of Earth citizenship. But they do a lot of shipping business out here. And they misplaced a daughter. Black sheep, the captain said. Went off to college, got involved with a group called the Far Horizons Foundation. Student activists. OPA front, Miller said. Associated, Shadid corrected him. Miller let it pass, but a flick of curiosity troubled him. He wondered which side Captain Shadid would be on if the OPA attacked. So this is our second protagonist, and my favorite one of the two. The one I like better.
Yeah.
Not that I dislike Holden, but I find Miller really fascinating. And I guess we should talk right now about the fact that this book was written by 2 people, right?
Yeah.
So James S.A. Corey is a pen name. I should have pulled up what their actual authors' names are, but I didn't do that. And one of the things, I always go back and forth on how much research I want to do, like, because I don't want it to influence my analysis, So I didn't research the method to which they wrote this story. But my guess is, just by the structure of the story, that one of these authors took Holden and the other author took Miller, and then they kind of combined their stories together and worked off each other. And there's like, I don't know, there's moments where like part of me felt like some of the strategy here was like, I write one chapter and define this world and these characters, and then I send that chapter to you, and you just pick up on it and write the next part, right? I think it was probably a little more organized than that, but there are moments very early in this book where it kind of feels that way, where like the chapter ends on a cliffhanger for one character, and then the other guy picks up that cliffhanger from the perspective of his character and then runs with it. I think that's fascinating, and I don't know. I don't know if it was done that way, but it does feel it.
Yeah, I think that's I agree with you, and people in the chat are saying that's basically correct. The authors were Ty Frank and Dan Abraham, and
Yeah.
I know that Ty Frank was like a long time like assistant of George R. R. Martin.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Hey, those are long books. You need a lot of help.
Yeah.
He's probably the assistant that like wrote down every bit of information.
But it definitely gives the book this interesting quality that you're not just switching between two characters. Like the characters are different in a way that it would honestly be pretty hard for any one person to represent. Like they just feel like very different people. They like down to a deep root level. Like you can tell the two authors are trying to say different things maybe, and in a way that works really well.
Yeah, I mean, and Daniel in the chat says we interrupt the sci-fi story to bring you a tech noir case, and that's because one of the reasons they feel different is because we've almost jumped into a completely different genre here. This is a completely different character, a person who sees the world totally different than Holden does, and he's in a different kind of book. And the thing that I enjoy so much about the later half of the story is how those books collide to make what I think the Expanse is going to be, right? Like, I think the start of this book is two different genres coming in contact with each other, and then we kind of see what happens, and then presumably the other books are going to take that combined thing and run with it.
Yeah, and I like that it takes so long for the two storylines to converge, because it gives Miller's noir story a lot of room to breathe and establish him as who he is before he basically does get sucked into their thriller plot. Like it's a sci-fi thriller.
Sure.
And it kind of just starts to be a sci-fi thriller book when he gets when he meets with them, because like he solved his mystery, they find Julie Mao, mystery solved. Now we got to shoot a bunch of guys, and then there's alien shit and stuff. So, but like it gives it plenty of time for him to be just by himself doing his own thing.
Yeah, and in the classic noir sense, he is a kind of a drunk, depressed cop who, the interesting thing about the story, and I think we'll get into this in a little bit, but did I just lose connection?
I hear you.
Okay, well, I just got a thing that made it seem like, okay, anyway. There's a specific moment where one of his partners tells him he's the shitty one, right? Like he's the bad cop that nobody wants to work with because he's just bad at his job. But I think the book like shows in different moments that actually he's pretty good at his job. Like he knows a lot of things. He's very observant. He's good at reading people. And I think a lot of that has to do with just his absolute like depression and this feeling of worthlessness that I wonder if, I think Muss is her name, the one partner he very shortly has. I wonder if she meant exactly what he thought she meant, or it was just like a self-fulfilling prophecy where she's like, yeah, nobody likes you. Everyone thinks you're the worthless, shitty detective. And that's why I'm stuck with you. And he just like, oh yeah, that's what I secretly feared that I was the whole time. And so I'm going to glom right onto that.
Yeah. I remember that being like, I don't think that's accurate. Like I get why he believes it at this point, but he definitely has a ton of experience, and he picks up on all these things that you feel like other people wouldn't pick up on. It's more like he's just kind of lost the will.
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely a drunk that is still reeling from a failed marriage, and but like I think even here in this kind of defining moment of his character, the instigating action, he sees his observance is defined here. He sees a look, just a flick of a look in his captain that makes him start questioning, like, okay, when the chips are down, is she going to be on my side? And the answer, we find out rather explicitly, is no. Yep.
But it's cool that it's setting up this conflict this early. This idea that his captain is not someone who has his back at all.
Yeah. And how do you pronounce that name? I'm just gonna say Al.
Okay.
Mentions the very kind of very subtle setup to the Venus situation at the end where like we specifically define here that Venus is not populated, like because they tried to and it failed, and that will become very important to the plot of the story in the latter half of the book.
Yeah, it's funny because I know that like one of the serious sci-fi proposals, or not sci-fi, one of the serious scientific proposals for colonizing Venus is like, hey, the atmosphere is really, really dense. If we just built like bubble cities, they could actually float on the atmosphere. And then the book is saying like, yeah, they tried that, it didn't work.
It didn't work. Sorry.
It's funny.
All right.
Okay, next page. Holden is forced to witness the destruction of the Cant. This would all be part of the protagonist number 1's inciting incident. 1 minute, Ade said, her voice loud enough to distort through his helmet speakers. Holden didn't turn the volume down. Her voice was admirably calm as she called out the impact countdown. 30 seconds. Holden wanted desperately to talk, to say something comforting, to make ludicrous and untrue assertions of love. The giant standing on his chest just laughed with the deep rumble of their fusion torch. 10 seconds. Get ready to kill the reactor and play dead after the torpedoes hit. If we're not a threat, they won't hit us again, McDowell said. 5, Ade said. 4, 3, 2, 1. The Camaraderie shuddered and the monitor went white. Ade took one sharp intake of breath, which cut off as the radio broke up. The static squeal almost ruptured Holden's eardrums. He chinned the volume down and clicked his radio at Alex. The thrust suddenly dropped to a tolerable 2G, and all the ship's sensors flared to overload. A bright light poured through the small airlock portal. Report, Alex, report. What happened? Holden yelled. My God, they nuked her. They nuked the Cant, Alex said, his voice low and dazed.
So they nuked it.
They nuked it.
I realized that I did not pull any slides specific to the space combat, and I feel bad about that because I think it's actually really remarkably written, and this is the closest to space combat we have in the slides. So I think we can use this to talk about that. Yeah,
sure. I mean, what I like about the space combat is that it's not like the ship, dove and fired. It's like the characters are doing things inside the ship, and then they're like hearing sounds, and they're like, "Oh, that must be the anti-torpedo machine guns."
Right.
And the ship shuddered as the torpedo is launched, and you're having to put together what's happening through these like basically what you'd be experiencing in the bowels of like a battleship on Earth, where you're just like, I have no idea how the battle's going. I just hear sounds, and I'm guessing we're doing okay because we haven't been hit yet.
Yeah,
stuff like that.
It's all part of this very limited, close third person perspective that I think was a really smart decision for the story. I totally agree with you. I like that. I like that we're forced to see the battle through one person's eyes, and therefore, like, there's no like big nice view screen where we can see the entire battle, which is great cinematically, but not realistic. And it takes a long time, as David's pointing out in the chat. There's like I think it was like 10 minutes. Like the ship that blows up the Cant fired those torpedoes like 10 minutes prior or something, and they're just like sitting there waiting, like trying to plan, trying to figure out how, if they can dodge them, what to do. And it's just like I feel like that's exactly what any kind of space combat would be.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the part with the I don't know if there's a slide on the Martian battleship, but like the idea that they see the ships that are going to attack them coming for long enough to have like several long conversations before they actually arrive. I think it's great, actually. Matthias mentions that the scene where they nuke the Cant is such a shock. I agree that they use violence very effectively in this book overall. Like it never feels cheap or just like kind of fake stakes because like you spend so little time with the Cant, but you already kind of care about the captain and Ade, and they're dead. Like that's a surprise. That's an effective surprise that's a little bit upsetting. And the book does kill a lot of people, and at no point are you like over it. It's always kind of painful.
Like, I mean, there's, especially in like a noir story, you wouldn't think that there would be like this much, like Miller kills a bunch of fools in cold blood, and like a lot of noir stories would just be like, that's part of the dark, brooding, grizzled detective thing. But because this is also half Holden's story, like the plucky idealist who thinks everything's actually better than it is, like refuses to accept that, and that allows I think that brings more weight to the deaths and the murder than you'd expect. And
Totally.
I think the book takes a long time really setting up the world in a way in which at no point during this entire fight do you actually believe that the ship's going to be blown up. Like every character, like right before this part we cut out is the captain talking to the ship saying, okay, as soon as the first torpedo hits us, we're going to shut all the power down and we're going to go dead, and we're going to hope that if they see how that we're completely taken out, they won't bother throwing another torpedo. Like it's just like this doesn't happen. They're a trade ship. They have water on them, this precious thing, this thing we've defined as one of the most important things toward life in this world. It's not going to happen, and then it does.
Right. I mean, it would be like a cargo ship on Earth being just like blown out of the water, like not attacked by pirates, but just destroyed like wantonly. And it's just like, that would never happen.
Yeah, but like a cargo ship with like the world's most precious resource on it.
Right. Yeah, and like you said, there even it's a good story technique, because not only is the captain kind of already planning ahead, but like Holden is saying like, all right, we're gonna burn for the Camaraderie. We're gonna be there to offload survivors, and you're like, okay, I'm thinking ahead of where the story is going, and then bam, completely derailed. It's very effective that way.
Yeah, and this one line I think is a really good kind of defining moment for Holden earlier in the book. Is Holden wanted desperately to talk, to say something comforting, to make ludicrous and untrue assertions of love. Like that's the character, right? He cares so much about like everyone, and he wants to be there to reassure people. He care, like I think they call him an idealist later in the book, and he like he's the kind of guy who wants everyone to like him, and so like he takes all this really harder than I think a lot of people would.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I also like the little detail of the fact that he cranked his radio up really loud so he could hear Ade specifically, and then as soon as everything goes down, like the static is so loud that it almost ruptures his eardrum, because he's just cranked it so loud just so he can make sure he hears her even though she's not talking directly into the mic. That's just a really good little emotional beat there that really sells the impact of what just happened.
Yeah,
like the squeal of that static.
Absolutely. Yeah, brutal. Love it.
Yeah. All right. So we flash back to Miller now as his investigation of Julie Mao continues, and it pisses off quite a few people, including Anderson Dawes from the OPA. And this is one of the first indications of like Miller's like slow thoughtfulness that his chapters really occupy a lot. So I wanted to pull this out. After he clocked out, Miller stopped at a food cart near one of the tube stations for a bowl of vat rice and textured protein that approximated teriyaki chicken. All around him on the tube, normal citizens of Ceres read their news feeds and listened to music. A young couple half a car up from him leaned close to each other, murmuring and giggling. They might have been 16, 17. He saw the boy's wrists snake up the girl's shirt. She didn't protest. An old woman directly across from Miller slept, her head lolling against the wall of the car, her snores almost delicate. These people were what it was all about, Miller told himself. Normal people living small lives in a bubble of rock surrounded by hard vacuum. If they let the station turn into a riot zone, let order fail, all these lives would get turned into kibble like a kitten in a meat grinder. Making sure it didn't happen was for people like him, even Shadid. So, a small voice in the back of his mind said, why isn't it your job to stop Mars from dropping a nuke and cracking Ceres like an egg? What's the bigger threat to that guy standing over there? A few unlicensed whores, or a belt at war with Mars? What was the harm that could come from knowing what happened to the scopuli? But of course, he knew the answer to that. He couldn't judge how dangerous the truth was until he knew it, which was itself a fine reason to keep going. The OPA man, Anderson Dawes, was sitting on a cloth folding chair outside Miller's hole, reading a book. It was a real book, onion skin pages bound in what might have been actual leather. Miller had seen pictures of them before. The idea of that much weight for a single megabyte of data struck him as decadent.
That's great.
Yeah, so there's a lot to kind of parse in this one. I really like. I think the reason I like the Miller sections more, the reason why I like the writing of the Miller sections more, and the reason why I like Miller as a character more is these kind of very long introspective moments like this, where he's just sitting there like looking at people living their lives and like talking himself into being this person he really wants to be, but so often fails at being, this person that does the right thing, helps the people, has hope and optimism towards the future. This is living, this is life, this is the thing I am supposed to be doing to protect these people, and he often just fails at it.
Yeah, I mean, he seems like, as a character, he seems like a philosophical, quiet, thoughtful person who, through, the vagaries of fate, took this job as like a rough, basically just like somewhere between a cop and just like a security enforcer, where he's sort of continually made to do things that are brutal, and like he's killed people in the past and all this. And it's definitely worn on him, and it's broken him down, beaten him down a little bit, but he still has this kernel of being just a very internal, thoughtful, analytical person who cares about other people. And that's, I think, what makes him so likable is, stuff like this, where part of the reason why he's motivated at all is he's like, hey, it's my job to protect these people, even if the people who are my boss are telling me not to do it. Like I know that these people don't have anybody on their side, so I have to do what's right. And that's he's not the same as Holden, but I think that's why there's an interesting tension between the two characters, because Holden has no problem at all just like always doing what he thinks is right, and it's almost like Miller comes around to that position over the course of the story, whereas maybe Holden begins to see the flaw in always doing what you think is right every second.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that it's not too much to say that I think a younger Miller was closer to Holden than probably either character would be comfortable in admitting. You do get this feeling that there's this optimistic, like, gonna change the world for the better guy underneath all this, and it's just been beaten out of him over the true realities, and that hadn't quite happened to Holden yet. But there is some pragmatism to Miller that is important. This one line I really liked was like, he couldn't judge how dangerous the truth was until he knew it, which is like telling the truth to people is a source of conflict between Holden and Miller throughout this book, because Holden is the kind of guy that he has information and he thinks everyone has the right to know this information and they can judge off the information for themselves. But in order to do that, they need to know it. And so he sends it out. Miller doesn't quite have that opinion, and is kind of proven right by the events of the book that sometimes it's better that people don't know things, or at least you need to take the time to get to the bottom of the things before you shoot them out into the universe. Which is kind of what he's doing here. He's saying, like, I need to assess how dangerous the truth is first. But also he's admitting that in order to do that, you have to know it. So like someone has to know the truth. Who gets to decide who knows the truth, and who gets to decide who is the one that determines whether it's dangerous or not?
He still feels like he's responsible in the same way that I think Holden does, but he's older and more able to think about consequences and the realities of the way the world works.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of what everyone says about Holden, is like you're naive, you don't really understand how the belt works. And Miller certainly does, I think.
Yeah. And I just want the part I pulled out at the end here was something that Elliot sent me. A quote that he sent me that was really fantastic was just the idea of the book that Anderson Dawes is reading, this onion skin paged book bound in actual leather, this kind of ridiculous thing in this world. The idea of that much weight for a single megabyte of data is just a hilarious thing to think about a book, especially since it's in a book. Like mine's right. I read that in this book right here.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
I mean, it's totally realistic though. Like it's hilarious, but it's totally a realistic thing, right? Like I already feel like books are decadent because I've moved so many times. I get tired of moving them. I'm like, if you own books, you must be wealthy, because otherwise, how can you possibly keep moving them between houses?
Frustratingly.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Love it. Okay.
All right.
Next chapter.
So we've jumped ahead a bit here because this is a long book.
Okay.
So the tensions between the planets continue to rise. Things are getting bad, and Miller has. I think at this point Miller has been fired from his job, and he's just kind of taken up to continue his investigation anyway.
So this is. Yeah, sorry. So this is a moment of brilliance as Miller proves that he's actually quite a good detective, no matter what anyone else says. The Rocinante, owned by Silencio, I don't know how to read French, Silencio Courant Holdings out of Luna, was a gas hauler that had landed at Tycho just hours before the end of the arrival window. Silencio Courant was a medium-sized corporate entity with no obvious ties to the OPA, and the flight plan from the Palace was plausible. Miller put his fingertip over the delete key, then paused. He sat back. Why was a gas hauler going between Palace and Tycho? Both stations were gas consumers. Flying from consumer to consumer without hitting a supply in the middle was a good way to not cover your docking fees. He put in a request for the flight plan that had taken the Rocinante to Palace from wherever it had been before, then sat back to wait. If the records were cached in the series servers, the request shouldn't take more than a minute or two. The notification bar estimated an hour and a half, so that meant the request was getting forwarded to the docking stations, to the docking systems at Palace. It hadn't been in the local backup. Miller stroked his chin. 5 days of stubble had almost reached the beginning of a beard. He felt a smile starting. He did a definition search on Rocinante. Literal meaning, no longer a workhorse. Its first entry was as the name of Don Quixote's horse. That you, Holden? Miller said to the screen. You out tilting at windmills? Sir, the waiter said, but Miller waved him away.
I love this because he's totally right. He sees this and immediately scopes it out as bullshit. And not only that, is able to, just through what he understands of Holden from public records and what's been released and what he's done so far, is able to figure out his naming convention and
the cute name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so wonderful. And this is, I think, right after not too long after the moment where he realized, oh, I'm the terrible detective. I'm the shitty one. I'm the one that no one wanted. I'm the one that's bad at their job. This is me. And then he has this moment of I think generally brilliant detective work. In that he's just no one else. I feel like anyone else looking over the stuff would have hit that delete key.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's very satisfying too, because this whole time you've kind of been waiting for him to, figure things out because you already know them. That's an interesting way of conducting a detective story, right? Where the detective is having to figure things out that your other plot line knows already, right?
Sure.
And it works, right? You're not, it could have been done in a way where you'd be like, oh my God, this is so boring, waiting for him to figure out stuff that I already get. And it doesn't feel that way at any point, really. You're just like, yeah, good job, Miller.
Yeah. And that's, I think you're right. And I think it's because the mystery of this is not really a mystery. At this point, he's actively trying to find a character who we jump into his head every 20 pages or so. Right. So yeah, the tension of the scene is not what is going on. The tension is will Miller be clever enough? You're sitting here you're screaming at him, no, that is the one, don't hit that key, figure it out, put it together. And he does. And yeah, so you're proud of your character. And I think that's really a way to endear you to a character.
Yeah. Cool.
Matt, you're cute, says Stinky.
I'm being complimented in the chat. Thank you, everyone.
How do you deal with that? Does it make you uncomfortable? Does drawing attention to it make you uncomfortable, Matt? How you doing? You doing okay?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's fine. Normal.
It's just a normal day for Matt. All right, moving on. So this is what I was kind of hinting towards a little bit. We've moved forward a little bit, and Miller is on his way to Eros Station because he's found out that's where Holden is, and he bumps into a missionary here. Do you attend church? Haven't in years, Miller said. I was Methodist when I was anything. What flavor are you selling? The missionary lifted his hands in a gesture of harmlessness that went back to the African plains of the Pleistocene. I have no weapon. I seek no fight. I'm just going back to Eros from a conference on Luna, he said. My proselytizing days are long behind me. I didn't think those ever ended, Miller said. They don't. Not officially. But after a few decades, you come to a place where you realize that there's really no difference between trying and not trying. I still travel. I still talk to people. Sometimes we talk about Jesus Christ. Sometimes we talk about cooking. If someone is ready to accept Christ, it doesn't take much effort on my part to help them. If they aren't, no amount of hectoring does them any good. So why try? Do people talk about the war? Miller asked. Often, the missionary said. Anyone make sense of it? No. I don't believe war ever does. It's a madness that's in our nature. Sometimes it recurs. Sometimes it subsides. Sounds like a disease. The herpes simplex of the species, the missionary said with a laugh. I suppose there are worse ways to think of it. I'm afraid that as long as we're human, it will be with us. Miller looked over at the wide, moon-round face. Some of us believe that we shall all eventually become angels, the missionary said. So I like this whole conversation, and that's why I wanted to pull this because I want to talk to you about this. This idea, I like this idea of this missionary that doesn't proselytize anymore, that just kind of hangs out places, and if people walk up to him and are like, "Hey, can I talk about Jesus with you?" and he's like, "All right," but is not like actively trying to do it. Right? It's like a guy who's kind of given up on his path, but not entirely, which I think is a really great mirror for our protagonist.
Yeah. I mean, also, I didn't think about this until I was staring at this right now, but it's kind of funny how Miller's getting him to talk about Jesus instead of the missionary telling him about Jesus. It's like the guy did a judo on him,
Exactly.
and now they're having a deep conversation.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, this is a nice opportunity for the authors to spell out their thesis a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have these two characters talk about the nature of humanity, and it's kind of cynical, right? This
Sure.
idea that war will never leave us. It's a madness that's in our nature. I love that line. It's just a great, succinct way of saying, like, yeah, it's part of us. No war ever makes sense. It's a madness that's in our nature. It's like, wow, that's so much more satisfying than any other explanation I've ever heard.
Right. And this idea that I think that they're kind of introducing here in a way that I didn't pick up on at first was this idea of transhumanism, right? This idea of like, as long as we're human, we're going to be this way, but there is something else. Like some of us believe that we shall all eventually become angels, or in a different context, take some sort of alien species and use it to modify our DNA to become something beyond human.
Right.
Which is like, it's the book kind of introducing this concept slowly. Like we haven't gotten to Eros yet. We haven't gotten to the proto-molecule. But the book is priming us for this talk and concept of transhumanism. And I think that's
definitely
really slyly done by the author there.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's introducing the theme in a way where you don't recognize it at all. It's hidden in a religious veneer. I mean, I think it's very clever because it's not the integration of religious themes into the story are not just set dressing. They're thematically important too.
Yeah. I mean, it's just kind of a way of showing that like across the species, this is a thing that we're all thinking about, and we all frame it via our belief system, right? A religious person could see it as finally ascending to heaven or to our beyond life existence, where a scientist could see it as the thing we must do to fulfill the full potential of our species. It's just a different way of looking at the same thing, and I like it.
Yeah, me too. All right, next slide. Holden and Miller meet for the first time as all hell breaks loose on Eros. The guard nodded and moved up to the door, then slid his card through it and punched in a number on the keypad. The heavy blast door slid open. Beyond it, the room was even darker than the corridor outside. A few emergency LEDs glowed a sullen red. In the faint illumination, Holden could see hundreds of bodies scattered across the floor, unmoving. Are they dead? Holden asked. I don't know nothing about, the guard said, but Miller cut him off. You go first, Miller said, and pushed the guard forward. Hold on, Holden said. I don't think it's such a good idea to just charge in there. 3 things happened at once. The guard took 4 steps forward and then collapsed on the floor. Miller sneezed once loudly and then started to sway drunkenly. And both Holden's and Miller's hand terminals began an angry electric buzzing. Miller staggered back and said, "The door." Holden hit the button and the door slid shut again. "Gas," Miller said, then coughed. "There's gas in there." While the ex-cop leaned against the corridor wall and coughed, Holden took out his terminal to shut off the constant buzzing. But the alarm flashing on the screen wasn't an air contamination alert. It was the venerable 3 wedge shapes pointing inward. Radiation. As he watched, the symbol, which should have been white, shifted through an angry orange color to dark red.
So they're all radiated now.
Yeah.
They're gonna die, definitely.
This was a great moment in the book, and felt like it was pretty good in the show too.
Yeah,
actually,
yeah. I mean, it's this moment of legitimate panic when you're like, "Oh shit!" And then I think that it's nice that the book kind of says like, "Well, we can treat this stuff in this world, though. Like, if you get to the ship, there's still stakes to it, right? Because so we got to get back to the ship. The med lab on the ship will have the meds that can save their lives, and even then, only barely. But there's really this moment of oh shit. And what I really like about it is we've had these 2 characters throughout the entire story. They finally come together on Eros. They're still feeling each other out, and then the events of this kind of bind them together in a way. They've even though they've been butting heads at first, they both like were drawn to this idea of we have to go investigate. We have to go see what's going on here. Their curiosity is similar in that regard. So they leave everyone else and go off and do this, and then this happens, and then they're kind of connected to each other through their death, possibly.
Yeah, that's true. There's a tension between them, but there's also a similarity between them that's harder to see, and the fact that they both want to save these people and to solve this problem brings them together. And then, of course, now they have a ticking clock element that they share, so they're kind of stuck together.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's a great moment of just like, uh-oh, I don't know. It's very rare that a book can make you feel the what the book makes you feel in this moment, where you're like, oh, both of our protagonists have just been fatally injured, basically.
Yeah.
And then the story kind of walks it back and says like, okay, there's a way out of this, but it's going to be hard. And then you're just absolutely locked into the story.
But it's the kind of injury that like, it's like, you don't feel much in the moment, but you're dead, right? Like it's that kind of that is horrifying to me, where it's just like, oh, something happened. You're dead now. You're not going to start feeling it for a couple hours, but you're definitely dead. Sorry.
Yeah.
That knowing would just, I'd hate that.
Yeah, me too. It's terrible.
Yeah, and we got to talk about like what's happening on Eros in general, because it's like as the full scope of what's happening here is revealed to us, it becomes more and more horrifying. Like there's millions of people on this thing, right? Or 1.5 million or something like that.
It's definitely at least hundreds of thousands, right?
Yeah.
That was one thing that I felt that the movie, I keep saying that the show did not fully convey the idea that like this is a enormous atrocity.
Yeah.
And part of it was just like they couldn't, like the book takes the time to show all of these images of just these like massive chambers full of dying and dead people.
Yeah.
And it's quite graphic is a funny word to use, but it makes sure you realize the scope of this, whereas in the show they just kind of mention offhand like, oh, hundreds of thousands of people, and then just move on.
Yeah. But yeah, it's horrifying, and you see that you are much more in tune with what is happening to these people, and it's awful. And so now you've got the stakes of our characters trying to get off of here surviving, but in the meantime everyone else is dying horribly and going to be mutated into just monsters, like the Dead Space monsters. It's rough. Yeah. And the thing that I like about this is, and this is where the season ends. So this is the first point in my reading of the book that I didn't know what was going to happen after this point, right? Because we had seen the first season of the show. So I didn't know anything about this. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know why. So the big question here is why? Like, why did this happen? Why are you doing this? Who's responsible for this? And that's when the mystery, the mystery part really starts to kick in, because like, who would do this? Why would they do it? And I think that kind of pulls you through the latter half of the book, or at least part of it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Matthias says one of the things they've mentioned, that with the radiation damage, Miller constantly talks about the pills and how he has to take the pills and he's going to have to take them for the rest of his life. But Holden really doesn't mention that aspect of the survival from this attack they have to cope with.
That's interesting.
And I agree. And I think that's specifically because Miller is such a more introspective type of person that would focus on the little things like that, where I think Holden is the military man who would just say, oh, just another checkbox to check in my daily routine. Okay, that's fine.
I also feel like Miller's just older and thinks more about the future.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Holden is thinking about the present and caught up in the problems that he's solving right this minute. But yeah, I mean, it seems like a minor thing, but even that is saying something about the characters. So that's cool. Good pull.
Yeah. All right. Next, we're going to move to the next one.
Yep.
All right. So this is a little bit later on Eros. I wanted to spend some time on this because this is another Miller contemplating the meaning of existence and humanity as he's dying of radiation and trying to escape the station with his life. When, Miller wondered, does someone stop being human? There had to be a moment, some decision that you made, and before it you were one person, and after it, someone else. Walking down through the levels of Eros, Ko's bleeding body slung between him and Holden, Miller reflected. He was probably dying of radiation damage. He was lying his way past half a dozen men who were only letting him because they weren't used to people being scared of him, or they were used to people being scared of him, and he wasn't. He had killed 3 people in the last 2 hours. 4 if he counted Ko. Probably safer to say 4 then. The analytical part of his mind, the still, small voice he had cultivated for years, watched him move and replayed all his decisions. Everything he'd done had made perfect sense at the time. Shooting Ko, shooting the other 3, leaving the safety of the crew's hideout to investigate the evacuation. Emotionally, it had all been obvious at the time. It was only when he considered it from the outside that it seemed dangerous. If he'd seen someone else, Muss, Havelock, Sematimba, he wouldn't have taken more than a minute to realize they'd gone off the rails. Since it was him, he had taken longer to notice. But Holden was right. Somewhere along the line, he'd lost himself. He wanted to think it had been finding Julie, seeing what had happened to her body, knowing he hadn't been able to save her. But that was only because it seemed like the sentimental moment. The truth was his decision before then, leaving Ceres to go on a wild hunt for Julie, jerking himself out of a career, remaining a cop for even a day after the first kill all those years early. None of them seemed to make sense, viewed objectively. I love this. Like, I couldn't pull this all out because this goes on for like another 2 pages and I could not fit it all in one slide, so I had to just find a place to cut off. But this idea of he's desperately looking for like a clear demarcation of when does someone turn into a monster? When does someone stop being human? And he can't find one. He can't find a clear demarcation point of this is the moment. Instead, it's a bunch of small compounding decisions. The decision not to do this, the decision to do this, the things that in the moment seem like obviously, emotionally, objectively the best thing to do.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, part of it, I think, is the fact that he's juxtaposed with Holden here. I mean, in his own objective eye, he's juxtaposed with Holden, and this idea that like I should have quit, back in the beginning when I killed the first person. I knew it was bad, and I should have made the right choice. And I think there's a subtext of like Holden would have, noped out of that in that situation, because Holden always immediately does the right thing. Even if it ruins everything for everyone.
The right thing, quote unquote. Yeah.
But that's the thing is like to live pragmatically and to not just kind of be a disaster of a human being. You do sometimes have to like grin and bear certain situations, but here he feels like he's grin and borne it for his whole life. And at some point it became monstrous, and he's not sure when exactly, and that's awesome. I love what's being done with this character, and I love how it plays off of what's being done with the other protagonist.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it's so, I think it's so key that it's happening here in the moment where they've really, this is the first time these two characters have been put next to each other, where they're really having to play off each other, and you can kind of already see the subtle effect that just being around each other is having on both of them.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I do love how the show depicts this part where he's just shooting everyone. It's just so even without this introspective, even without 2 pages of internal dialogue with himself, it still conveys that he's losing it, and then that he kind of finds some grounding with Holden subsequent to that.
Yeah, I agree. David says Holden is the Jon Snow of this book. It is true. He does know nothing.
Yeah, or the Ned Stark. It works. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great.
Same guy.
Cool. Next slide.
So speaking of the Holden Miller conflict, let's dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, the longer they hang out, the less they get along. Been watching the news at all? The detective asked. Holden shook his head, then moved over to a chair on the other side of the compartment. Something in Miller's face was chilling his blood. No, he said. What happened? You don't hedge, Holden. I admire that about you, I guess. Just tell me, Holden said. No, I mean it. A lot of people claim to believe things. Family is the most important, but they'll screw a $50 hooker on payday. Country first, but they cheat on their taxes. Not you, though. You say everyone should know everything, and by God, you put your money where your mouth is. Miller reached over and flipped on one of the screens, then pulled up a file with his name on it, date stamped from less than an hour before. A recording of video from a Martian news source showing the night sky through a Martian dome. Streaks and flashes fill the sky. A ticker across the bottom of the feed says that Earth ships in orbit around Mars suddenly and without warning fired on their Martian counterparts. The streaks in the sky are missiles. The flashes are ships dying. And then a massive white flare turns the Martian night into day for a few seconds, and the crawl says that the Deimos Deep Radar Station has been destroyed. You're telling me that I did this, Holden said. That if I hadn't broadcast that data, those ships would still be alive. Those people. Yeah, that. And that if the bad guys wanted to keep people from watching Eros, it just worked.
So yeah, we see the consequences of Holden's classic hero protagonist
move
here.
Yeah.
It's interesting because this, like, speaking personally, like, I am very much a Holden type in that I really strongly believe that, like, everyone should be given the truth and they should get to decide how they handle that. And I really do think this book challenged me in that regard, because I was definitely on Holden's side here. I was like, yeah, absolutely. If your people are covering something up, that should be exposed and let the people decide what they make of it. That's legitimately what I believe. And this book is saying, okay, well, sometimes you do that, and then all this really, really terrible shit happens. Some people hear the truth and they make a decision that is a bad one, and tons of people die, and that's not something you really consider when you're like being in this kind of paladin-esque, like, I'm going to do the right thing moment, right?
Yeah. I mean, to step back for a second, ultimately what the book does is say, if Holden and Miller had, slipped in the shower and hit their head at the beginning of this book and not done anything, everything would have happened pretty much the same, right? I mean, like maybe the Earth ships wouldn't have needed to blow up quite so many Martian ships, but like the Ceres station still would have been, or Eros, I mean, would have still been eaten by the proto-molecule. The Cant still would have been destroyed. So, I mean, it's interesting because the book does present a lot of situations where it appears that Holden's Jon Snow behavior is creating all these terrible consequences. But it's like, yeah, but like, he's trying to prevent much worse consequences. And the worst you can say about him really is that he kind of fails to prevent those consequences.
I do agree that that's the kind of the flaw in Miller's argument, that like saying that his information spreading is the thing that directly led to these people's deaths, I think might be extending the truth a little too far. Like it definitely, like Holden's incessant need to share information definitely escalated the conflict, but we are absolutely led to believe that this conflict was going to escalate anyway, that the machinations of the people responsible for the stuff on Eros wanted conflict because it distracts from what's going on there. And so, I agree that it might be too far to say that, but I do think there is a point to this idea of, and as David is saying in the chat, that that Holden does what's right without thinking about what's good, and sometimes those are different things. And David Bean quotes Men in Black by saying, "A person is smart, people are dumb, panic animals, and you know it." Yeah, I mean that there is, like, governments of our world make the decision every day that the citizens of their countries cannot, should not, do not need to know certain things.
Right.
And like no matter how altruistic the government is, no matter how democratically elected and democratic in form, every organizational body makes that choice. Yeah,
right. You can't make deals without holding things back, right? And information has a value. It has more value when it's secret too.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. That's what Elliot mentions, that it's interesting that to fight the secret clandestine group with the truth is not the right way to do it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, especially like when the truth has been planted, right? Like, I mean, that's the one thing is, and that's Holden's defense throughout this whole thing is, I didn't say that it was Mars that blew up the Cant. I just pointed out that the beacon that attracted us to it, that led to our ship's destruction, was built in Mars. And then I just let people come to their own conclusions.
Yeah, right. I let humans take this nuanced and complicated piece of data and trusted that they would make the intelligent and reasoned conclusion instead of just reacting violently and reflexively, which is basically like that's. I mean, the whole situation was set up, right? Like that's the kind of the fun part, is that it's Earth, right? Like that's so. Can I say first and foremost, like the idea that Earth is the bad guys, I found delightful because because I was so reluctant, like subliminally reluctant to believe that Earth was the bad guys.
Sure.
I'm like, well, I'm Earth.
Yeah. That's home base.
Yeah. Right. Like, of course, why would Earth be the bad guys? And then when you finally understand the geopolitical, for lack of a better word, situation, you're like, oh yeah, like Earth totally would be incentivized to do this. And it's not Earth per se, right? It's like a faction of crazies who happen to be, Earth aligned.
Without getting too specifically like political, like real world political, this is like the same kind of argument that went on when Edward Snowden leaked all that stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Like his excuse for it was, I didn't leak it to the general public. I leaked everything. Instead of me making the decision what I felt was important and what wasn't, I gave everything to the newspaper, and I let the newspaper choose. So therefore, it is not my fault if something that gets someone hurt is leaked. It's their fault. And that's, I mean, that's very Holden-esque, I think. And whether or not you believe that information should have been leaked or not is a whole nother story. Yes, I do. But but yeah, I mean that is the kind of point, right? That you're making that kind of specific point that like they were the ones that did it based on the information. They made that choice. I said everyone should know this and let other people decide what to do with it.
Yeah. I like the connection to Snowden. I almost wonder if it's not, literally part of their inspiration.
Yeah,
it works so well.
Yeah,
cool. People are suggesting words. Solar political, says I'll think. Celestial political, says David B.
Yeah. I like it.
Cool.
All right. So here, Matt, the slides I had to pull, the most heartwarming moment in the entire book right here. So these our characters are about to go back to Eros. They've hatched their plan to just no. This is when they're going to the secret hidden station to try to find the people responsible for Eros. Sorry, I jumped ahead too far. And they have a little conversation right before they say goodbye to each other. Well, Miller said, "Here we go, eh? It's been a hell of a ride." I think I wrote Miller twice, and I shouldn't. "It's been a hell of a ride," Holden said. "Can't say it's all been pleasant, but actually, I don't look. One of them said something.
We'll catch up."
Yeah. "Tell the others I said goodbye," Miller said. "Will do," Holden said. Then, as Miller moved past him toward the lift, "So, assuming we actually live through this, where should we meet up?" Miller turned. "I don't understand," he said. "Yeah, I know. Look, I trust Fred or I wouldn't have come back here. I think he's honorable, and he'll do the right thing by us. But that doesn't mean I trust the whole OPA. After we get this thing done, I want the whole crew together, just in case we need to get out in a hurry." Something painful happened under Miller's sternum. Not a sharp pain, just a sudden ache. His throat felt thick. He coughed to clear it. "As soon as we get the place secure, I'll get in touch," Miller said. "Okay, but don't take too long. If Thoth Station had a whorehouse left standing, I'm going to need help prying Amos out of it." Miller opened his mouth, closed it, and tried again. Aye, Captain," he said, forcing a lightness into his voice. "Be careful," Holden said. Miller left, pausing in the passageway between ship and station until he was sure he stopped weeping, and then made his way to the cargo ship and the assault. Matt.
It's great.
It's so wonderful, isn't it? I mean, like,
yeah.
You have Miller, this character who's questioning his humanity, who has convinced himself all his mistakes have turned him into this inhuman piece of shit that nobody wants him around, nobody likes him. Part of the reason he's chasing after Julie is because she's become this symbol of like maybe of like hope, a person, and it's kind of supplanted his ex-wife as like a relationship. I don't think we pulled a slide specifically, but as the book moved on, he's like increasingly seeing her everywhere. Like the ghost of Julie is everywhere. And then this Holden, for all his faults, and he does have them, Jon Snow does have faults, but he also is just this wonderfully like warm person who is just this inviting person that wants to believe the best in people. I mean, just here, like, I trust Fred. Like, why would you trust Fred? The epilogue specifically says, no, you shouldn't have done that. But that he's like, despite the differences that he and Miller have, despite the conflict that they've had, he's part of the crew now. And of course he treats him like it's just a fact. Like it's like, I need the crew together. You're the crew.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's very heartwarming. But then it's kind of, I mean, yes, but it, like, this moment is then used to just like slap us in the face with later, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, I was trying to pretend like that didn't happen.
But like, that's why that hurts so much.
Yeah.
Is that it was set up so well here.
Yeah.
The fact that it means so much to him to be accepted.
Yeah.
Means that, and he makes the choice later with full awareness of what's going to happen. Yeah. But he does it anyway.
Yeah, because he sees
which
it
is
as
a very
necessary.
Holden thing to do, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. And I love this line, something painful happened under Miller's sternum. Mm-hmm. You mean his heart?
Yeah.
He can't, like, I love the text doesn't say, oh, his heart ached. No, it's the
right.
thing under, like, I think he's so convinced in his inhumanity at this point that he doesn't even register it as, oh, it's my heart and I'm feeling love and appreciation right now in my heart. Like, no, there's just an ache under my sternum in that place that's under my sternum. Oh, I love it. I love it so much.
So you mentioned a few times how he sees the Julie Mao ghost now and then. And for me, I felt like, yes, at first it's just kind of a replacement for the figment of his wife that he sees.
Sure.
But then eventually I'm like, oh, I think this is like psychic magic.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because by this point she's been absorbed into the proto-molecule and is arbitrary. Like who knows what's going on with her? Like, we know there's still some essence of her inside the proto-molecule that is becoming ever more powerful at this point. So
did any of the rest of you guys have that read? I don't know if I like that. Like,
and don't tell us if like the story, if like the the sequels
Yeah.
bled on.
Yeah.
Whether that's actually true.
Did you have that read after reading this book, if you can recall that? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost too magic-y to me. But I mean, we're already about to see that the Thing does a lot of crazy shit that seems magic-y.
Yeah. Let's get into that.
Sure.
Maybe we can continue that conversation.
Yeah.
All right. We learned the truth of the proto-molecule from Dresden. There is a civilization out there that built the proto-molecule and hurled it at us over 2 billion years ago. They were already gods at that point. What have they become since then, with another 2 billion years to advance? With a growing dread, Holden listened to Dresden speak. This speech had an air of something spoken before, perhaps many times, and it had worked. It had convinced powerful people. It was why Protogen had stealth ships from Earth shipyards and seemingly limitless behind-the-scenes support. We have a terrifying amount of catching up to do, gentlemen, Dresden was saying, but fortunately we have the tool of our enemy to use in doing it. Catching up, a soldier to Holden's left said. Dresden nodded at the man and smiled. The proto-molecule can alter the host organism at a molecular level. It can create genetic change on the fly, not just DNA, but any stable replicator. But it is only a machine. It doesn't think. It follows instructions. If we learn how to alter that programming, then we become the architects of that change. So, Holden said, you figure out how the bug works, and then what? Then everything. Belters who can work outside a ship without wearing a suit. Humans capable of sleeping for hundreds of years at a time, flying colony ships to the stars. No longer being bound to the millions of years of evolution inside one atmosphere of one pressure at 1 G, slaves to oxygen and water. We decide what we want to be, and we reprogram ourselves to be that. That's what the proto-molecule is.
Oh boy, Matt. So let's
become angels.
Yeah, just become angels. So let's talk about that. I mean, this is big. And before we talk about like the overall thematic implications of the proto-molecule and what this represents to this story and possibly the entire 9-book series, I just want to talk about the little things this does. Where like this is all leading up to Holden or to Miller pulling out a gun and just shooting this guy in the head, right? And we learn a little bit later he says the reason he does this is because this guy was being convincing.
Yeah.
And one of the things I love about how the book kind of hints at that is it's a random soldier who says catching up. Like, I just think that's a very small way of showing that people are paying attention, that people are listening to this, that people are like intrigued by what this man is saying. And as people are saying in chat right now, that it's pretty convincing. Like if you legitimately believe, like, first of all, that an alien race is coming to kill you. Second of all, we've established that this, like, the people in the belt are suffering, are dying, are dying of thirst, of dying of lack of air, have this miserable existence that under the thumb of Earth and Mars the entire time. A solution to that seems pretty damn appealing.
Yeah, I mean, I admit that the part of me that loves like transhumanist sci-fi and Blindside and the Quantum Thief novels and all that, I'm like, oh yeah, there we go. We go. We're on the singularity track now. We're gonna become post-human. We're gonna conquer the stars. That's the future I'm down for. But like in context of this story, Miller is aware that this guy is a psychopath who's willing to just use up a whole planetesimal worth of people.
Yeah.
For an experiment and. Not going to stop there.
And it's this interesting combination of these two characters, right? And this is the breaking point for the Holden Miller friendship, right? They had this beautiful moment where they've came together and like he's part of the crew now, and now we have this point that team up is irreparably damaged to the point that Miller dies at the end. Anyway. And I like this is kind of combining everything we've been talking about with these two characters, because Holden is this guy who will always do the right thing. And the right thing here is not shooting an innocent man, or not innocent, but not shooting an unarmed, surrendered man in the head, right? But at the same time, Holden is not someone who would ever be swayed by this kind of argument as well, right? Because like the necessary step to becoming angels, quote unquote, is testing this thing and murdering millions of people. So that's not ever something that Holden would be interested in allowing. Miller, on the other hand, is the type of person who I think could see himself being convinced that is a necessary step to do, like that is the greater good.
Yeah.
But also, he's the guy that's willing to do the necessary thing in the moment to stop it from happening, right? So it's like these two different characters with these two different belief systems coming together in this moment, and like this is the result, is that this guy gets shot.
Well, I think the difference that drives this is that Holden doesn't believe that people would be sucked into this guy's scam.
Right.
And Holden is definitely wrong about this.
Mm-hmm.
And Miller's definitely right that people did get sucked into this guy's scam, and if he's allowed to keep talking, it'll happen again.
Yeah.
Like the next scene that happens after this scene in the story where Miller doesn't shoot him is like the powers that be just kind of reshuffle, and the proto-molecule continues to be developed, probably in some other horrific way.
I mean, we kind of know that for a fact because the epilogue of the story ends with Fred hinting that he's gonna pursue this research anyway, right?
Sure.
And he's one of the ones standing here.
Just the idea that the proto-molecule still exists somewhere to be exploited, it's gonna be. Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
And the thing that I think that's I think you're absolutely right that Holden has this optimistic belief that this won't work on people. But this is from Holden's perspective, this chapter, and he says this speech had an air of something spoken before, perhaps many times, and it had worked. It had convinced powerful people. And so this is Holden admitting that what this guy is saying works on people, but he has such this optimistic faith, I guess, in people at large, that even if this thing worked on the corrupt, right? It worked on the corrupt people in power, but like people, humanity, this civilization of humans, Belter or Martian or a person of Earth, would never be tricked by this.
Mm-hmm.
And he's wrong. Like, and I get the feeling that he kind of knows he's wrong, like somewhere in his head. And I think one of the reasons why Holden's reaction to what Miller does here is so strong, because I think somewhere in his head he knows that it was the necessary thing to do, and he can't square that. He can't. His brain does not allow him to square that on a way that makes sense, because it seems to go against everything that he believes in as a human being, and that's why he lashes out about it, because in the back of his mind he gets it.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think the way he lashes out is so, I don't want to say performative, because he definitely is mad, but like it hits a nerve. It hits a deep nerve,
right?
And it hits a deep nerve because it's so close to home, I think. Yeah, I like that take a lot.
Yeah. And Al it points out a part that we didn't pull, that he almost admits it to himself. He almost gets there. Holden felt his certainty slip. He hated everything about Dresden's argument, but he couldn't quite see his way past it. That's a really good line. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and David points out that there's really no way of telling what the proto-molecule would actually end up doing. What are the chances this guy actually understands the way something such an advanced culture made? Yeah, that's absolutely true. Like the confidence at which he feels like we could absolutely wield this thing, like to be confident enough to sacrifice millions of people for an experiment just to see that the future is, we will absolutely find a way to harness this thing, is just something that like evil, just like something that a monstrous person is able to calculate in their head.
Yeah, if and also I can't help but think, like, if Rorschach from Blindsight gives you some molecular goo, you shoot it into the sun immediately.
Yes,
like there's no, whatever it is, you don't even want to know anything about it. Like it's going to be bad for you.
Yeah. I agree.
If gods shot this at you, you're not gonna figure it out.
I know what we'll do. We'll outsmart the gods by using their own weapon. Oh no, that every time you try to do that in mythology, it gets real bad.
Yeah, and now we lost Venus.
Venus was precious to us.
Okay.
Next slide. So I just want to talk about the rest of the crew that we haven't spent a lot of time on, and I thought this was a pretty good slide to do it in.
Yeah, thanks for letting me be the one to read this one.
Oh, this is mine.
Oh wait, hold on. Which one? Oh yeah,
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. I got confused.
Keeping his voice neutral and professional, he said, "Naomi, can you pass the pepper?" Amos's head snapped up, and he dropped his fork on the table with a loud clatter. "Holy shit, you guys are doing it!" Holden said. "What?" "Something's been screwy ever since we got back on the Rossi, but I couldn't figure it. But that's it! You guys are finally playing Hide the Weasel!" Holden blinked twice at the big mechanic, unsure of what to say. He glanced at Naomi for support, but her head was down, and her hair completely covered her face. Her shoulders were shaking in silent laughter. "Jesus, Cap," Amos said, and a grin wide on his face. "It fucking took you long enough. Had she been throwing herself at me like that, I'd have been neck deep in that shit." Alex said, looking shocked enough that it was clear he hadn't shared Amos's insights. "Wow." Naomi stopped laughing and wiped the tears away from the corner of her eyes. "Busted," she said. "Look, guys, it's important you know that this doesn't affect our..." Holden said, but Amos cut him off with a snort. "Hey, Alex," Amos said. "Yo," Alex replied. "Exo boning the captain gonna make you a really shitty pilot?" "I don't believe it will," Alex said with a grin, exaggerating his draw. "And, oddly enough, I don't feel the need to be a lousy mechanic." Holden tried again. "I think it's important that..." "Captain?" Amos continued, ignoring him. "Considering that no one gives a fuck, it wouldn't stop us from doing our jobs, and just enjoy it since we'll probably be dead all in a few... Just enjoy it since we'll probably be all dead in a few days anyway." Naomi started laughing again.
It's so good.
I love this.
And yeah, there's so much of this great camaraderie and just character stuff. Just everyone is so well characterized. Everybody loves Amos.
Amos is the best. He's the best.
Amos is the best. I mean, I think Naomi's great. Like Alex is the least big personality on the crew, but obviously, I mean, if anything, Alex serves as a straight man, I think.
Yeah.
To like, especially here to the comedy.
I think my enjoyment of Alex was very well informed by the show, because I like Alex show a whole lot, and I don't think he's as characterized in the book so far, but I think there's plenty of time for that. And
honestly, I think that might have been part of why I enjoyed the second read through more. Is like I had I forget the actor's name, the actor who played Miller. I had his performance in my head, whereas my prior interpretation of Miller's character was kind of dominated by the way the voice actor for the book does it, which is kind of like dour and hopeless, and I feel like the actor in the show brings a lot more like dynamism to who Miller is.
Good old Tommy Jane.
Yeah.
It is Thomas Jane, right?
I don't know.
That's helpful.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. I everyone in chat's talking about how much they love this scene. I agree. I had to pull it. It's really, I just kind of threw it in here at the end. But I love this. I love this. Like as Matthias is saying, like the pages preceding this thing was like him terrified of people finding out, and him like talking to Naomi, and like, of course, Holden is the guy that wants to tell everyone, right? He wants full disclosure, and Naomi's like, we better not, and because she manages to convince him, which I think is important for his character, right?
Yeah.
That he kind of sides with her in that, and then he's like really freaking out about it, and like, I mean, just like keeping his voice neutral and professional. "Can you pass the pepper?" And this is like I almost run up against believability here, when like this is a scene specifically constructed that would never happen in real life, right? Like there's no way anyone would be able to guess that two people are having sex just because of like
I mean, I think that Amos are like he's way more tuned in than anyone realizes, and he thinks like that it's likely, and then he sees Holden being what definitely comes off as super weird.
Yeah.
And he tries to interpret it, and I mean, like, I don't know, you can tell when two people like walk into a room and they have like a secret between them, and they're like really trying to like not look at each other at all and all that stuff. I don't find it that, I mean, it's done in a comedy. The dropping the fork and everything is a comedy beat, but like,
sure,
you kind of know, you can kind of pick things up.
I'll admit that my that there have been times when I'm at parties and there are two people that just like hooked up or made out in the backyard at the party, and then walk back in and try to stagger their walk back into the house, and you look at them and you're like, I know what you did.
They kind of orbit around the room in an improbable way, trying to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Right.
got that. I gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like he's probably like, "Hey Naomi, can you pass the pepper?"
Yeah.
It's the
I
worst
love
way
it.
ever. Yeah, it's great. It's wonderful. I love it.
Okay. Next slide. Eros Station manages to dodge a giant ship which is hurtling at it. Our characters try to figure out why and how. Don't really remember the massive Eros off the top of my head, he was saying to no one in particular. About 7,000 trillion kilos, Naomi replied, give or take, and the heat signature's up about 2 degrees. Jesus, the mechanic said. I can't do that math in my head. That much mass coming up 2 degrees like that? A lot, Holden said. So let's move on. About 10 exajoules, Naomi said. That's just off the top of my head, but I'm not off by an order of magnitude or anything. Amos whistled. 10 exajoules is like, what, a 2 gigaton fusion bomb? It's about 100 kilos converted directly to energy, Naomi said. Her voice began to steady, which of course we couldn't do. But at least whatever they did wasn't magic. Holden's mind grabbed onto her words with an almost physical sensation. Naomi was, in fact, about the smartest person he knew. She had just spoken directly to the half-articulated fear he'd been harboring since Eros had jumped sideways. That this was magic, that the proto-molecule didn't have to obey the laws of physics. Because if that was true, humans didn't stand a chance. Explain, he said. Well, she replied, tapping on her keypad. Heating Eros up didn't move it. So I assume that means it was waste heat from whatever they actually did. And that means that entropy still exists, that they can't convert mass to energy with perfect efficiency.
So I pulled this because I mean this is one of the biggest examples in the book about its adherence to actual rules of science and physics and the world in which we live, right? And you know, the reason why I pulled this is because we talk a lot about this stuff. We talk a lot about and how important it is to you because you are a person who cares about you enjoy scientific realism in your sci-fi. You like it a lot.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of times where I feel like people write a book and they say, we're going to be true to life. We're going to do hard sci-fi that's realistic as possible. But it doesn't like matter to the themes or the characters really much. It's just like a cool bonus of the story. And this to me is the authors using the idea of scientific realism in their science fiction story in a way in which it becomes important to the characters and to the themes, right? Because this is a moment in which this thing has just done something incredible, and our characters talk themselves down with science.
Yeah.
And I think I love it. I think it's brilliant. I think it's a perfect way of using this world and this realism that we set up in a fun, character important way. It's fantastic.
Yeah, right. It's delightful. It's delightful to me. This idea that like, they make an appropriately big deal of a moon being heated up a couple of degrees.
Yeah.
Like that's just intuitively, even if you don't know, I suspect even if you don't really know the physics of it, you would understand like, okay, that's going to be a huge amount of heat to heat up a whole moon.
Yeah. I can confirm as someone who doesn't know anything.
Yeah, and they don't try to propose how they did it, but the idea is like, well, they basically annihilated some mass using who knows what, and the consequence was heat plus moving a giant moon.
Yeah, but the fact that it's not magic, the fact that yes, it's way more technologically advanced than anything we could possibly do, but just the fact that it still abides by the rules of the world gives them hope. And I think that's a really wonderful way of taking this adherence to everything has to conform to the world as we, the audience and the authors, understand it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a great way of writing in why that matters in your book.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get enough of this. I thought this was like, oh, I get it now. I get why all this matters so much in this story.
Yeah, right. That it not just be magic, right? It has to be predictable. It almost reminds me of Brandon Sanderson's laws of magic, where it's like, if you're going to have magic, then magic also has to be predictable in your story, or it'll be really frustrating.
Sure.
So when they say it's not magic here, what they mean is it doesn't break the rules in a way that makes it impossible for you to care about or think about.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Before we move on to the next slide, I do want to jump back to something we just kind of went by, which was when we asked the question about whether or not people thought that the Julie character in Miller's mind was real or just in his head. So Matthias says they think they aired on no, that the Julie spirit was different enough from the proto-Julie that he didn't think they were related. Kyrgyzstan says they were suspecting it was getting a little bit magical. David said they saw it entirely in Miller's head. So
a range of opinions, I guess.
Yeah, so you're not the only one who thought that, right?
Cool. Yeah.
All right, but now we get to see real Julie, sort of. So Miller has gone back into Eros Station because he's realized that the radio that we've been hearing throughout the second half of the story is not just mindless words coming from the monster that's living in Eros. It's actually Julie. And he goes and finds her and tries to talk her away from bringing this giant asteroid to Earth. You're a fighter, Julie. You never let anyone call your shots for you. Don't start now. If we go to Earth, it'll eat them too. The same way it ate me. Yeah. She looked up at him. Yeah, he said again. Like that. What happens on Venus? We die, maybe. I don't know. But we don't take a lot of people with us. And we make sure no one gets a hold of this crap, he said, gesturing at the grotto around them. And if we don't die, then... well, that'll be interesting. I don't think I can. You can. The thing that's doing all this, you're smarter than it. You're in control. Take us to Venus. The fireflies swirled around them, the blue light pulsing slightly, bright and dim, bright and dim. Miller saw it in her face when she made the decision. All around them, the lights went bright, the grotto flooding in soft blue, and then dimmed back to where they had been before. Miller felt something catch at the back of his neck like the first warning of a sore throat. He wondered if he'd have time to deactivate the bomb. And then he looked at Juliet Andromeda Mao, OPA pilot, heir to the Mao Krakowski corporate throne, the seed crystal of a future beyond anything he'd ever dreamed. He'd have plenty of time. I'm afraid, she said. Don't be, he said. I don't know what's going to happen, she said. No one ever does. And look, you don't have to do this alone, he said. And let's goodbye to our boy Miller. Because he's definitely dead now, right? Like, there's not this line that says, if we don't die, then, well, that'll be interesting or anything.
Yeah, right. And there's not the implication that, like, the thing slows down and then gracefully falls into pieces
You're
and so
jumping
forth.
to the next slide, man.
Oh, yeah, sorry. But yeah,
but
this is great.
This is the culmination of his arc, right?
Yeah. It's fun to me that they have this cool alien sci-fi stuff in this story, which is otherwise very grounded.
Yeah, I mean, while he's having this conversation with him, the proto-molecule is like infecting him. It's wrapping around him. It's going in him. He's slowly being turned by this as he's talking to her. But the thing I love about this is, the thing we need to understand is he's never, throughout this entire book, he's never actually talked to Julie before in his life, right?
Yeah.
His entire vision of Julie is created through documents he's read and this imaginary person, or I guess, Matt, if you want to say it's like a magical telepathic thing. That's all his interaction with her is. But his ability to know her, his ability to understand her, his ability to be a pretty damn good detective, because he's really good at getting people and reading people, is why he's able to talk her down here. Nobody else, I don't think any other character in the situation, in the story, could have done what Miller did here, because they didn't understand her on the level that he did. And that's why he's able to talk her down. That's why he's able to succeed. So it is he feels like he's this horrible, inhuman monster that his life experiences have taken all hope from him and taken all purpose from him and taken all reason from him, and everything's bad, everything sucks, there's no point to it all. Especially me. And no, you save everyone. Mm-hmm. You are a hero, and you do it through your skill, through your understanding of people.
Yeah. Matthias, says the alien sci-fi stuff was his favorite, and that the Song of Eros something we haven't mentioned, the idea that it's broadcasting this hella creepy, just like random words and sounds,
Yeah, yeah.
and that was one of my like. I felt that was one of the most striking bits of the book was this idea of like it's just broadcasting pure creepy shit.
Yeah,
It's great.
It is great. Yeah, we didn't talk too much about. We didn't focus on the horror that much, Matthias. I'm sorry that we didn't pull any slides like that, but I agree with you. It's weird. It's creepy. It's fun. I like that a story that focuses so much on that realism can also pull that off in a way that I don't question it. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Kirk says, man, just imagine the hash that Holden would have made of the situation.
Right? Oh my God, he would have fucked this up so bad. Earth would be dead. Everyone would be dead.
But back to what you were saying about like this basically proves what a good like people person Miller is, because he built like an accurate model of who she was purely from, information about her and pictures and so forth. And he's close enough that he knows how to talk to her.
Yeah. Elliot says this season in this scene in the show is perfect. It's chef's kiss.
I can't wait to watch it.
How far does the second season go? Because I kind of want to read the books before I watch the show now, but I also kind of want to watch that second season. I want to see. I want to see how this half of the book is depicted.
Yeah. Does the second season extend beyond the end of this book? I guess is the way to phrase it.
Yeah. I guess the easy way to find that out is just watch it until the book ends and then stop watching it.
I guess so. All right. Slide the next one. Actually, the last slide, the end of the book. Holden reached out, took Naomi's hand, and held it tightly as the asteroid entered Venus orbit and then seemed to stop. He felt like he could feel the entire human race holding their breath. No one knew what Julie would do now. No one had spoken to Miller after the last time Holden had, and he wasn't answering his hand terminal. No one knew for sure what had happened on the asteroid. When the end came, it was beautiful. In orbit around Venus, Eros came apart like a puzzle box. The giant asteroid split into a dozen chunks, stringing out around the equator of the planet like a long necklace. Then those dozen pieces split into a dozen more, and then a dozen after that. A glittering fractal seed cloud spreading out across the entire surface of the planet, disappearing into the thick cloud layer that usually hid Venus from view. Wow, Amos said, his voice almost reverent. That was gorgeous, Naomi said. Vaguely unsettling, but gorgeous. They won't stay there forever, Holden said. Alex tossed off the last of the tequila in his glass, then refilled it from the bottle. What do you mean, Captain? He asked. Well, I'm just guessing, but I doubt the things that built the proto-molecule just want to store it here. This was part of a bigger plan. We saved the Earth, Mars, the Belt. Question is, what happens now? Naomi and Alex exchanged glances. Amos pursed his lips. On screen, Venus glittered as arcs of lightning danced all across the planet. Cap, Amos said, you were seriously harshing my buzz.
That's the end of the book. I want to talk about this ending because this is obviously a series that was always built to have multiple books, right? This is always going to be a continuation. They never set out to just tell one story. But I think what this ending does is conclude a story in a very naturalistic, like satisfying way, while still projecting what's to come, right? Because we have this thing doesn't just crash into Venus. It slowly, carefully, and in an organized manner lands there and disseminates there. And as Chad is saying, the ending really strikes as a great mix of horror and hope, which is true. Like there is this beautiful thing that happens, but the implications of it are horrifying. And we have this team that has been through hell all together happy. But what happens next?
Yeah, it's perfect, right? Because it's a satisfying ending for Holden. It's a satisfying ending for Miller.
Yeah.
And we know more stuff's going to happen, probably with both characters, but, but definitely with Holden. But still, you can just like I think this is actually one of the reasons I didn't feel compelled to pick up the next book. Was that I'm just like, I kind of like where we left everything.
Yeah.
I'm not desperate for the next book. Like sometimes I'm just like, oh my God, sometimes they write a series where you're just like, oh, this is not finished. This is the middle. I need to keep going. Like I can't imagine stopping, the Song of Ice and Fire, book and not wanting to read the next one. Um, but this one, I'm just like, oh, good, that was satisfying.
Yeah, true. But let's play a game of what do you think's going to happen. Obviously, if you've read past the first book, you cannot participate in this game. I'm sorry, you are banned from the game. But Matt, what do you think?
I mean, I think that very vaguely speaking, I think there's going to continue to be like political intrigue and like war in some sense, but complicated and full of twists and turns and backstabbing.
Yeah.
And then I also think that the proto-molecule is going to have an ongoing impact as like different sides try to use it, or even like maybe it starts putting out, ships or something like that.
Yeah.
Who knows?
There are two instances of it left, right? There's whatever's going on Venus, and there's the bit in the safe that Holden has given to the extremely trustworthy and good guy Fred.
Yes.
Who we didn't talk about too much in the story, but I think they're going to matter a lot more in the books to come. But
yeah, speaking of elements in the books to come, the woman, diplomat, whose name is, she's not in this book at all, 0. So.
Yeah, but I think we're going to see her in the next book for sure. One of the things I really latched onto, and I have no idea this is correct or not, but as I was pulling the slides and reading through it and studying the book in preparation for tonight, there's this idea I have around Miller, right? Like as we said, I think neither of us think that Miller is gone from the story. The book has laid the seeds for that. So I am fascinated by this idea of Miller interacting with the proto-molecule in interesting ways, because you have this speech from Dresden, whereas this thing has the power to make you into whatever you want to be. Not satisfied with who you are, it can make you into what you want to be, right? And Miller is this character that has been going through this journey of discovery, of trying to re-find who he is. Who he had this image of himself, this pessimistic, terrible image of himself as this monster, this inhuman person, and he couldn't find out even when that happened. And by the end of the story, as he's being subsumed by this alien creature, you get the idea that he's recaptured some of his humanity, right? He's doing good, he's helping people, he's trying to make up for his perceived flaws and failures. And I just think that's an alchemy that I find fascinating, and what the book could do with that. Like what is a Holden, or sorry, what is a Miller that has been injected with this thing that can modify him into a version of himself? What does that look like? And that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I love that idea. I really hope that the story does take that direction.
Cool.
I like Matthias' idea that the Chekhov's gun of the traveling Epstein is going to wake up the elder gods.
That's perfect. Yeah. I do expect the Mormon ship to play in somehow, because I was like, oh, it sucks for them that we didn't talk about that, but that idea is just like, well, we'll take this big ship and we'll just ram it into the station and it'll go into the sun, and then it just whiffs. And so the Mormons are probably going to be like, hey, okay. So we're mad at you, but now that it's not destroyed, can we redo that whole arrangement?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what the situation is with the ship now.
Well, I mean, he forcefully throws some of the Mormon people off the ship that are furious.
But the ship is now just coasting at a high speed in some direction. It could be retrieved, right? Or am I wrong?
Theoretically, yeah.
Okay. Well,
maybe not. See. Maybe it was truly just powered up to max speed and then abandoned, and it's just gone now.
Yeah, man, I don't know why I'm having trouble remembering, but I feel like they did something to it that may have damaged it or something. I don't know. It's not that important, but yeah, that was a big. Kind of funny in a dark, cynical way that they stole the Mormons' hope of the future away to try to save Earth. And then whiffed, yeah. Right.
Yeah. Daniel brings up a good point. How do we know that the aliens are even real? Which is a good point. The only source we have on, yes, this is aliens that threw this at us, is Dresden. who is probably not the most trustworthy man in the world.
Interesting. I just assumed you know, how else would you make it? But yeah, that maybe
I don't know.
interesting.
Science. I don't know.
Science. Cool.
Kyrgyzstan says they read this book a week ago, then they were too impatient to wait for the next from the library, so they bought it on Amazon and started book 3 today. Oh gosh. That's a lot of reading.
Yeah.
Well done. Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading the next in the series. It's going to be a bit for me to get there because I got a lot of books I have to read before that. But
yeah.
Any questions or comments or anything that we didn't cover that you guys wanted to talk about? Elliot sent me a big old essay email, and I tried to mix in all the things he said throughout our slides today, but I might have missed some of the stuff. So Elliot, if I did, sorry, you can make up for that right now.
Yeah. Otherwise, just kind of randomly sprinkle some credit for Elliot throughout the entire episode.
Yes. Credit for this podcast goes to Elliot, who's brand new. Well, it's not brand new, but whose Media MD podcast, which is not brand new, but is 3 years old today, is now on the Doof Network. Hey.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Congratulations.
Congratulations to all of us.
Yeah, to all of us.
Congratulations to all you listeners who get to listen to it via our website.
Yeah, because that's important.
All right, as we're waiting for questions to come in, do you want to just talk about next month real quick?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Next month, we are heading back to the world of Mistborn. Matt, we're going to be reading the second book in the Mistborn trilogy, The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. I know this was not your favorite book, but from what everyone has told me, the series improves over the course of those books. So,
yeah, it was funny that everyone basically said that Mistborn was Sanderson's worst book.
yeah. So we'll see. This was a special request by a patron, by the way. We have that Supreme Leader Doof level on Patreon that allows people to pick a book for the book club, and they have selected this book. So the voting for books will return for the September book club, but August, Sanderson.
Yep, and I'm sure that people will not complain because folks love Sanderson.
They do love Sanderson. The book club will be on Friday, August 30th. That's the last Friday of the month at 9:30 p.m. All right, we do have a question from Matthias. Matt?
Favorite image/moment? I loved the one that sticks in my head. I love the image of the like you mentioned it earlier, like the rib cage being dragged by the hand and on the on the floor that's basically made of Zerg creep. And I also love the moment when Miller shoots the guy in the head spontaneously in a way that's it's just a great story moment, particularly because you kind of know it's coming and you know it's going to be terrible, and that Miller is throwing away his new belonging with his crew, and it's just like a great it's very, very memorable and well set up story moment.
Yeah, that's a good one. I really like, this is going to be gross, but I really like the imagery of what's his name, the medic guy, Shed. I really like the moment where Shed gets his head blown off. Just like I think the writing does a really good job of playing that moment at its absolute most shock value. And the thing was, I had seen that in the show, right? So I knew it was happening.
Yeah.
I knew it was going to happen, so I was not surprised, but I still think the book writes it in such a shocking way that you still kind of feel it. And I mean, I will always love the moment where Miller gets his formal invite to be on the crew, and we can pretend that that's just the book ends right there, and they're just going to be this 5 people just riding through space together, just being happy forever.
I like that your favorite moment is the setup, and my favorite moment is the part where your heart is ripped out as a consequence of the setup.
I think that shows our different personalities, Matt.
Yeah, that's great. that's what makes this work so well.
Yeah. Elliot asks, if you had to pick a side to fight for, OPA, Martian, or Earther, which would you pick? That's a good question. I don't know.
I like the Martians. I like the Martian aesthetic.
I think, I think out of the 3 in this mixed up terrible war, when there's bad people and good people on each sides, it seems to me that the Martians are the most stuck in the middle, have not done that much specifically wrong.
They're just trying to live their lives.
They just want to make that planet green, baby.
Yeah, they have a dream.
Yeah. Yeah, the OPA seems like too reckless and hot-headed for me. Or maybe that was just the book making me feel that way.
And frankly, I see the OPA. I see the like. What's weird is I kind of see the Belters as being other because
that's true.
They're weird, and it's like, well, Matt, that's a bad reason. I'm like, hey, you asked. So,
yeah.
Althaint says, more of a comment than a question, but the importance of realistic gravity and acceleration as it affects humans is so good. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, that chase scene where they're frantically chasing after Eros, and they like know that the longer they accelerate, the harder it's going to be. Yeah, it's really cool. I love when space stuff really messes with G-forces. I think it's really fun. It's a fun way of talking about space maneuvering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Elliot says, did anyone else feel that sometimes the two point of views were a bit wasted on Eros when Miller and Holden were alone and were just flicking between them? I think maybe a little. I mean, the stuff that I liked about that was the third person perspective is so close that they allowed us to see them. Like, by the time I got to them meeting, I had this image of Miller as this like really like thoughtful kind of character, but Holden just sees him as this like gruff, stoic, scary guy. Like, I think he says at some point, like, just looking at Miller like scares me.
Yeah. Right. He seems a lot more hot-headed than we know him to be.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. I like that you're seeing the clash between their perceptions. They both come into this encounter with a lot of preconceived notions about the other.
Yeah, but I think, Elliot, if your point is that maybe they could have emphasized that a little more, I could see that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Kyrgyzstan says they were a bit confused by the fact that it's third person at the start of each chapter, and they found it hard to track whose point of view we were in. Did you? My book said the name next to the chapter. I don't know if the audio, maybe did audiobook. I don't know. My book said the name. So
no, the audiobook did not. There were only a couple places where I was confused, honestly. Maybe it happened twice that I had to be like, oh, okay, we're in this person's head.
Mm-hmm.
But it was not a big deal to me.
Okay. That's interesting.
I mean, also, I think the audiobook reader does like a slightly different mode of reading between the two characters. Maybe I'm imagining that.
I mean, I feel like they should have just gotten two different readers. If they're really committed to doing the story right, they would have done that.
I agree. They should have.
Please spend double the amount of money creating this audiobook for my specific enjoyment, even though I don't listen to audiobooks.
Yeah. Please always do a full cast recording of every audiobook.
Come on, guys.
Or you failed.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Oh, I see what you're saying, Kyrgyzstan. Yeah, it's not that he didn't have the name. It's just that you got into reading a little bit and then you kind of forget. I'll be 100% truthful that happened to me a few times too, where I had to be like, especially when they're together, you're like, wait, which one is this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure.
Interesting, Elliot. Yeah. So the later books are not quite as delineated in the two point of views. That's interesting because when I think about this book, the thing that I think about most is the fact that it's 2 points of view, two authors, two different characters, two sides of the story coming together. So I'm kind of even more interested to read the next books. All right, guys. I think we're going to wrap up for the day and the month. Thank you, guys, everyone that tuned in live. This was a great conversation. It was very active. I love it. I'm glad you guys enjoyed the book and we're excited to talk about it. Thanks again to Elliot for sending his email essays. For those listening on the podcast, maybe come hang out next time. I know it's Friday night. People have like lives and stuff, whatever. But it is a lot of fun hanging out with you guys in chat. And I hope if you listen to this on the podcast regularly, you'll try to give it a shot next month.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of weeks in a month. We only do this one Friday a month.
Yeah, just give up your Friday.
Just give up one Friday a month.
You're so selfish, everyone.
Every month. for the rest of your life.
That's
so
what
you're fine.
That's what we do.
Yeah.
Speaking of which,
that's what we do. Damn it.
Speaking of which, next month's book, Matt, is going to be the 24th book in the Doof Book Club. That means we will have officially been doing this for 2 years, which is crazy.
That is crazy.
This is my favorite Friday of the month. I love it.
If you didn't know that, go check out all those 23 other books.
Yeah, you could follow me on Goodreads and have them all on a shelf on Goodreads.
Oh, cool. That's a fun trick.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you like what we do here at Doof Media and you want to see more of it, then head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia and consider donating $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. You get access to our private Discord server as well as the ability to vote for which books we cover. Tons of other cool benefits. So go check that out.
That's right. And once again, if you have any questions or comments or just want to reach out to us to talk about the Expanse, talk about Leviathan Wakes. I've said Leviathan's Wake so many times. Or talk about next month's book, The Well of Ascension. You can reach out to us on Twitter at doofmedia or via email at doofmedia@gmail.com. All right, guys, we will see you all next month. I forgot to ask you why it's called Leviathan Wakes. Is it like, is the proto-molecule supposed to be like the Leviathan?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think the Leviathan is like one of the beasts that will destroy the world in the end times.
Yes.
Stop the recording, by the way.
Yeah, so have I.
So the implication being that it could be that like war itself is the Leviathan, but the proto-molecule seems like a pretty easy assumption to make. Cool. Well, thanks for hanging out, everyone.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this one. I enjoy all of them, let's be honest here. But yeah, Matthias, I totally agree. I am failing on the keeping up with Pact part of that. And the personal reading as well. I am very behind on my reading challenge for this year.
And Deep Impact is now in the middle of my favorite part of, not only my favorite part of Pact, but probably one of my favorite parts of any Wild Bow story. So,
man, you keep saying that, and it makes me want to go back to it. But then I look at my stack of books over there, and I'm just like, I need to read you. Oh, well,
it's so good though.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to be honest here. The only reason why I'm keeping up to date on Ward is because I kind of have to. It's not that I'm not enjoying it. It's just that if this was not a weekly responsibility, there's no way I would be keeping up with it. So I feel you. Absolutely. I think Pact, my failure to keep up with Pact has absolutely proven that there's no way I would be keeping up.
And I like that it's basically my job to not read ahead on Ward, and yet I always do.
You do that anyway.
Yeah. I like how that is.
You do? Do you like that? I'm glad you like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Elliot, how do you do it? I'm going to be honest, when you guys told us what your plan was for that you were going to do a chapter every time a chapter is released, I was like, okay.
Yeah.
That'll last 2 weeks.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how long you last, right? Yeah. We weren't saying you were going to stop. We were saying there was no way you could have kept up that pace.
Yeah,
and you would have
given
up on that. But
yeah,
you did. You have. You are.
Touche. And it's not like you could. It's not like you could, like, plan ahead, right? And like record 3 podcasts at the same time, because like one of you hasn't read it before, so you have to do the same thing we did, where you can't read ahead. Like, you just can't. So you can't even make it easier on yourself like that. Yeah, I agree. Once you've committed to it, it makes you find a way to fit it in, for sure. You'll catch up, Matthias. That's the cool thing about it, is the book's always going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
It's always going to be there. All right, well, it's almost midnight, so I think we're gonna go to bed.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out, everyone. I had a great time. It was, really enjoyed the amount of interaction. I think it really made the whole thing more fun, and it's gonna be fun to listen to later.
How many dozens of hours of audio? So many.
Yeah,
So
a big num. Yes.
So it's absurd. I am considering, once Worm is finished, that like making a super edit that's just like every arc is edited together into one podcast. Just make it easier for listening, but it just like cut off the intro and the outro on each one, and the community and the questions on each one, and just do the chapter stuff, just to make like people coming back in after the fact, give them a little bit easier time, because I can't imagine like Worm is 40 something episodes and we're double that.
Yeah. My God.
And it's not done. It might not even be close to done.
Yay.
What have we done?
I know.
That's it. From now on, instead of making Media MD more like us, we're gonna bring them in to make us more like them. 30-minute episodes. That's it. No more.
Okay, Scott.
Let's do it. Next week, 30 minutes. No. Okay, let's be fair. 30 minutes per chapter, right? Because like they only do one chapter at a time. So the fact that there's 30 minutes is like basically cheating.
Yeah, you haven't been paying attention to how long their episodes are these last few weeks, have you?
Shit. What have we done? What have we done?
All right. Good night, everyone.
Yeah, good night, guys. We'll talk to you next week. Is next week the first of the month, Matt? No, it's a week after, right? So we're doing Tuesday recording again next week, right?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so we'll be live. I mean, half the people here are apparently way behind on Ward, so not even going to attend, but we'll be doing our live recording of Ward on Tuesday night, and hope to see some of y'all there. All right, guys, thanks again for coming. Really means a lot to us. We appreciate it, and we'll see you guys later.